America's haunted lighthouses, ghosts of the coast. There is a unique and profound loneliness to a lighthouse. They stand as solitary sentinels on the jagged edges of the world, built to defy the fury of the sea, their singular purpose to cast a beam of hope into an unforgiving darkness. For centuries, their keepers lived lives of extreme isolation. Their only companions, the ceaseless roar of the waves and the mournful cry of the foghorn. They were witnesses to nature's most violent spectacles, to shipwrecks that painted the surf red, and to tragedies that the sea would swallow whole. But stone and steel have a memory. These towers, battered by storms and steeped in solitude, have absorbed the echoes of every life they touched and every life they failed to save. They have become repositories of sorrow, of duty, and of death. And in the quiet hours, when the fog rolls in and the modern world feels a million miles away, the old keepers still walk the iron stairways. The drowned still cry out from the rocks below, and the lights that once guided ships to safety now serve as beacons for the lost souls forever bound to the coast. Before we begin, subscribe and hit the bell icon for more terrifying, true horror stories from across America. Number 1. St. Augustine Lighthouse, Florida. On the northern end of Anastasia Island, Florida, stands a tower that has defied hurricanes, wars, and the relentless passage of time. The St. Augustine Lighthouse, with its iconic black and white spiral stripes and brilliant red lantern room, is a beloved landmark, a symbol of the nation's oldest port. Tourists climb its 219 steps every day to witness the breathtaking panorama of the Matanzas Bay and the sprawling Atlantic. They see a monument to maritime history, a beautifully preserved piece of the past. But what many don't see, and what some are unfortunate enough to feel, is the profound and lingering sorrow that is soaked into its very foundation. For this beacon, which has saved countless lives from the sea, was also the site of a senseless tragedy, one that left behind echoes of children's laughter that curdle the blood and serve as a permanent reminder that not all ghosts are born of malice. Some are born of innocence, lost too soon. The story of the modern haunting begins not with the current tower, but with its predecessor. The original lighthouse was a Spanish watchtower converted in 1824 that stood closer to the encroaching sea. By the 1870s, it was clear that coastal erosion would soon claim it. A new, taller, and more robust lighthouse was commissioned to be built further inland. The man supervising this massive undertaking was Hezekiah Pettee, the superintendent of construction. He moved his family, including his wife and 5 children, to live on the site, turning the bustling construction zone into a strange and adventurous home. For his children, the half-built tower, the piles of brick, and the railway cart used to transport materials from the bay were a magnificent playground. The youngest girls, 13-year-old Mary and 15-year-old Eliza, were particularly inseparable. Their laughter a constant, joyful sound amidst the clang of hammers and the shouts of workers. The railway cart was their favorite diversion. It was a simple, hand-cranked supply cart that ran on a small track from the construction site down a gentle slope to the water's edge. The workers used it to haul massive loads of sand and coquina shell for the foundation. When the men were on break, the Pettee children, along with a young African-American girl whose name is lost to history, would pile into the cart and ride it down to the water. One sweltering day in July of 1873, the game turned deadly. The girls were playing in the cart at the top of the track. A small wooden block, meant to serve as a brake, either failed or was removed. The cart, laden with the weight of the children, began to roll. It picked up speed rapidly, careening down the tracks towards the bay. The terrified screams of the girls replaced their usual laughter. They fought to control the runaway cart, but it was too heavy, too fast. It smashed through the barrier at the end of the line, flipping over and plunging into the deep water of the Matanzas Bay, trapping Mary, Eliza, and their friend underneath its crushing weight in the murky water. By the time workers could pull the heavy iron and wood structure from the bay, it was too late. All 3 children had drowned. The sound of joy on the construction site was replaced by a silence so profound it was like a physical weight. Hezekiah Pettee, a man tasked with building a beacon of safety, was forced to complete his work while living in the shadow of his own personal, devastating shipwreck. He finished the lighthouse in 1874, a magnificent structure born from an unspeakable tragedy. Today, the old railway cart is long gone, and the shoreline has changed. But the spirits of the Pettee girls are said to remain, forever bound to their final playground. The St. Augustine Lighthouse is now widely considered one of the most paranormally active locations in the entire country, and the hauntings are not subtle. They are consistent, they are frequent, and they are unnervingly clear. The most commonly reported phenomena are the sounds of children. Visitors and staff alike report hearing the distinct sound of young girls laughing and playing, often coming from the top of the tower when it is confirmed to be empty. Disembodied footsteps are heard running up and down the 219 iron stairs, yet no one is there. A tour guide, locking up for the night, might hear a clear giggle from the darkness above. A visitor, climbing the stairs alone, might feel a small, cold hand brush against their own. One of the most chillingly specific encounters involves the apparition of a young girl. She is often seen on the lighthouse grounds or peering down from the catwalk at the very top of the tower. She is described as wearing a blue velvet dress and a blue bow in her hair, consistent with the clothing of the era in which the Pettee girls lived. One terrified tour guide reported seeing her standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at him. He called out, thinking a child had been left behind, and she simply vanished before his eyes. Another visitor, taking a photo of the empty tower from the ground, was shocked to see the clear image of a young girl in period clothing staring back at him from the lantern room when he reviewed the picture. But the children are not the only spirits here. The keeper's house, now a museum, is also a hub of paranormal activity. The imposing figure of a man, believed to be Hezekiah Pettee himself, or perhaps a later keeper, has been seen in the basement, a sorrowful, imposing shadow who seems to resent the intrusion of visitors into his home. The strong, sweet scent of cigar smoke will suddenly fill a room, though smoking has been banned on the premises for decades. This is often attributed to William A. Harn, a keeper who served for 20 years and was known for his love of cigars. His presence is not felt as a tragedy, but as a protector, a man still dutifully watching over his light and his home. There is another, more sorrowful presence as well. A woman is often heard weeping in the upstairs rooms of the keeper's house. Some believe this could be the spirit of Mrs. Pettee, forever grieving her lost daughters. Her pain is said to manifest as a heavy, oppressive sadness that can overcome visitors in an instant, bringing them to tears without understanding why. Objects are known to move on their own. Chairs are found rearranged, and doors will lock and unlock themselves. During one paranormal investigation, an EMF meter placed on a child's bed in one of the restored rooms began to spike wildly, its lights flashing in direct response to questions, as if a curious, unseen child were playing with the strange new toy. The sheer volume of paranormal claims has made the St. Augustine Lighthouse a mecca for ghost hunters. The Sci-Fi Channel's Ghost Hunters conducted a famous investigation here, capturing what they believe to be a shadowy figure moving along the upper catwalk and recording an audio file of a female voice crying out, "Help me." This evidence, broadcast to millions, cemented the lighthouse's reputation as a place where the veil between the living and the dead is terrifyingly thin. It is a place of profound duality. By day, it is a beautiful historic monument. By night, it is a playground for spirits who died in a moment of terror, their joyful echoes now a source of fear for those who walk the grounds. A chilling reminder that the brightest lights often cast the darkest shadows. Number 2, Point Lookout. Lighthouse, Maryland, where the Chesapeake Bay meets the Potomac River, there is a lonely finger of land called Point Lookout. At its tip sits a small, unassuming 2-story wooden lighthouse, painted a stark white. It looks quaint, almost peaceful against the backdrop of the water. But this tranquil facade belies a history of immense suffering and a paranormal intensity that has driven people to madness. Point Lookout Lighthouse is not just a haunted building, it is a focal point for the anguish of thousands, a place saturated with the psychic residue of war, disease, and despair. To step onto these grounds is to step into a place where the dead vastly outnumber the living, and they are not resting in peace. The lighthouse itself was built in 1830, and for its first 3 decades, it served its quiet purpose. Its first keeper, James Davis, died in the lighthouse after only 3 months of service, a dark omen of what was to come. His wife Anne took over, becoming the first of several female keepers. But it was the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 that transformed this isolated point of land into a true portal of hell. The Union Army established Hammond General Hospital on the grounds, a sprawling complex built to care for their wounded. Soon after, in 1863, they constructed Camp Hoffman, a vast and notoriously brutal prison camp designed to hold Confederate soldiers. Point Lookout was a strategically perfect location for a prison, isolated and surrounded by water on 3 sides, making escape nearly impossible. It was also a strategically terrible place for human survival. The camp was built on low-lying, swampy land with no barracks. The prisoners, at its peak, over 20,000 men were crammed into an area meant for 10,000, were housed in thin canvas tents. They were exposed to the blistering summer sun, the freezing winter winds whipping off the bay, and the constant, damp misery of the marsh. Food was scarce, sanitation was non-existent, and diseases like typhoid, smallpox, and dysentery ran rampant. The men starved, they froze, and they died in unimaginable numbers from sickness and neglect. At least 4,000 Confederate soldiers are officially recorded as having died here, their bodies buried in a mass grave nearby. The true number is believed to be far, far higher, perhaps as many as 14,000. The lighthouse and the keeper's house stood as silent witnesses to this entire ordeal. The keepers could hear the moans of the dying from the hospital and the prison camp carried on the wind. They watched as bodies were carted away day after day. The light that was meant to guide ships became a beacon overlooking a charnel house. The suffering was so immense, so concentrated, that it seeped into the very soil, poisoning the land with a grief that has never dissipated. When the war ended and the camp was dismantled, the psychic scars remained. The lighthouse was returned to its quiet duty, but it was no longer the same place. It was now an anchor for the thousands of tormented souls who perished on that point of land. The paranormal activity at Point Lookout Lighthouse is relentless, complex, and deeply unsettling. For decades, keepers and their families reported phenomena they could not explain. Doors would open and close with violent force. The mournful sound of the foghorn would blare on clear, still nights, even after it had been disconnected. The smell of rot and decay, like that of a battlefield, would suddenly rise up from the ground and permeate the entire building, only to vanish moments later. But the most terrifying encounters are with the apparitions themselves. One of the most frequently seen spirits is believed to be Anne Davis, the wife of the first keeper. She is described as a woman in a blue dress, often seen in the windows of the upper floors, looking out over the water, as if waiting for a husband who will never return. Her presence is often accompanied by a feeling of deep sadness and longing. Other keepers have reported waking in the middle of the night to find a woman standing at the foot of their bed, weeping softly, before fading away into the darkness. But it is the ghosts of the Civil War that are most active and most terrifying. The spectral figure of a Confederate soldier has been seen countless times, walking the grounds, pacing the shoreline, or even appearing inside the lighthouse itself. He is often described as gaunt and ragged, his face a mask of despair. One keeper's wife in the 1920s was so tormented by this apparition, which would appear in her kitchen and stare at her with hollow eyes, that she suffered a complete nervous breakdown. Other visitors have captured photos of what appears to be a man in a tattered uniform looking out of the lighthouse windows in rooms that were known to be empty and locked. The sounds are even more disturbing than the sights. Disembodied voices are a common occurrence. People have recorded clear EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, of men whispering fire, help us, and the names of Civil War battles. The sounds of men groaning in agony, as if from a hospital ward, have been heard echoing from the empty basement. The heavy, rhythmic sound of boots marching on gravel has been heard outside, but when visitors rush to the window, the grounds are empty. Paranormal investigators who have spent the night in the lighthouse describe an overwhelming sense of being watched by hundreds of unseen eyes. They report sudden, inexplicable drops in temperature, batteries being drained in an instant, and equipment being physically moved by an unseen force. One investigative team reported capturing a thermal image of a human-shaped figure standing in a corner of a room where the temperature had plummeted to near freezing. Another group fled in terror after hearing a blood-curdling scream emanate from the oil room, followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. The lighthouse was decommissioned by the Coast Guard in 1965, and for years it sat abandoned, falling into disrepair. The state of Maryland eventually took it over, and it's now part of Point Lookout State Park. The sheer intensity of the reported hauntings led to the formation of the Point Lookout Lighthouse Preservation Society, which works to restore the building and document its paranormal history. They have collected hundreds of first-hand accounts from keepers, soldiers stationed there in World War II, park rangers, and modern-day visitors. The stories are all terrifyingly consistent. The feeling of being touched by icy hands, the sounds of phantom cannons firing over the bay, the sight of spectral soldiers marching through the woods, and the overwhelming feeling of dread that clings to this beautiful but forever cursed piece of land. Point Lookout is more than a haunted lighthouse. It is a monument to forgotten suffering, a place where the echoes of war have never fallen silent. Number 3. Heceta Head Lighthouse, Oregon. Along one of the most rugged and breathtaking stretches of the Oregon coast, perched on a 1,000-foot-high cliff, sits the Heceta Head Lighthouse. First illuminated in 1894, it is said to be the most photographed lighthouse in the United States, and for good reason. Its brilliant white tower and historic keeper's house are a stunning sight against the dramatic backdrop of the Pacific Ocean and the towering sea cliffs. Its light, the most powerful on the Oregon coast, can be seen 21 miles out to sea. But Heceta Head is famous for more than just its beauty and its powerful beam. It is known as the home of a benevolent, yet undeniably present, spirit known as the Grey Lady, a ghost whose story is woven into the very fabric of the lighthouse's history and whose presence is felt so regularly that she is considered by many to be the location's longest-serving resident. So, lighthouse and its accompanying duplex keeper's house were built in a location so remote that materials had to be brought in by sea when the water was calm enough, or laboriously carted over steep, muddy hills. Life here was one of profound isolation, especially for the keepers' families. It is from this isolation and from a mother's grief that the legend of Heceta Head's ghost is born. While official records are murky, the most enduring story is that of a keeper's wife in the late 1890s, whose young daughter suffered a tragic accident and fell from the cliffs to her death. The mother, consumed by a grief too powerful to overcome, is said to have taken her own life shortly after, forever binding her spirit to the home where she experienced both her greatest joy and her most profound sorrow. Another version of the legend claims the spirit is that of a woman named Rue, whose infant was buried in a small, unmarked grave on the grounds. Whatever her origin, the spirit has been a constant presence for over a century. She is most often referred to as the Grey Lady due to the grayish, ethereal form she takes when she manifests. Unlike the tormented soldiers of Point Lookout or the tragic children of St. Augustine, the Grey Lady's presence is rarely described as malevolent. Instead, it is described as watchful, mischievous, and at times, deeply sad. Her activity is centered almost exclusively in the keeper's house, which now operates as a popular bed and breakfast, giving countless guests the opportunity for a first-hand paranormal experience. The attic is considered to be her primary domain. Both keepers and modern-day guests have reported hearing the distinct sounds of footsteps pacing back and forth in the attic when no one is up there. On one occasion, a workman was sent to inspect a broken window pane in the attic. He set the pane down, turned to get his tools, and when he turned back, the pane was gone. After searching the entire attic in frustration, he gave up and went downstairs. He was met by the innkeeper, who asked him why he had moved the pane of glass to the bottom of the stairs. The workman swore he had never taken it out of the attic. It was as if the ghost, whom many simply call Rue, didn't want the window fixed. Her antics are often subtle, resembling those of a poltergeist with a particular dislike for untidiness. The most famous story, corroborated by multiple B&B managers over the years, involves the kitchen. An innkeeper might leave a pile of dirty dishes in the sink overnight, only to come down in the morning to find the kitchen immaculately clean, the dishes washed and put away. Conversely, if a manager meticulously arranges a display of items on a shelf, they might return to find everything completely disheveled, as if Rue disapproved of the new arrangement. She seems to have a clear idea of how she wants her house to be kept. Guests, staying in the two rooms closest to the attic, the Mariner 2, and the Lightkeepers rooms, have the most intense experiences. Many have reported waking in the night to see the spectral figure of a woman in a long, dark dress standing in the corner of the room or at the foot of the bed. Her image is often described as translucent, a gray figure, just as her nickname suggests. One couple reported waking to the feeling of their blankets being gently but firmly pulled off the bed. When they turned on the light, they were alone in the room, the blankets in a heap on the floor. Others report hearing soft weeping coming from the hallway or the sound of a skirt swishing past their closed door. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence occurred in the 1970s, when the house was occupied by a professor from Lane Community College and his family. They were frequently disturbed by noises in the attic. One night, determined to confront the source, the professor raced upstairs and flung open the attic door, only to be met by the terrifying sight of a woman's specter floating in the middle of the room. He slammed the door and fled. The next morning, he and a friend decided to hold a small seance, using a homemade Ouija board to try and communicate with the spirit. According to their account, the planchette spelled out the name Rue and indicated that she was the mother of a deceased child and considered the house to be her own. Paranormal investigators have captured numerous EVPs in the keeper's house, recording disembodied whispers that seem to answer direct questions. The words no and leave have been clearly recorded. Strange light anomalies and orbs are frequently caught on camera, particularly in the attic and the hallway leading to it. Many people who spend the night also report having incredibly vivid and unsettling dreams, often involving a sad woman searching for a lost child along the cliffs. Presence of the Grey Lady has become such an accepted part of life at Heceta Head that the staff of the B&B speak of her with a strange mix of reverence and familiarity. They leave out a small journal for guests to record their experiences, and its pages are filled with hundreds of chillingly similar accounts spanning decades. They see her not as a monster, but as a permanent resident, a spectral innkeeper who watches over the house she can never leave. Yet, for all her seemingly harmless mischief, the experience of encountering her is profoundly unnerving. To be in a room and see a misty form coalesce in the corner, to hear the phantom footsteps of a grieving mother overhead, is to be reminded that you are a guest not just in a historic inn, but in a home still occupied by a soul so tethered to this world by sorrow that she continues to sweep the floors and watch over visitors, a ghostly guardian on a lonely, haunted cliff. Number 4. The Old Point, Loma Lighthouse, California. San Diego, California, is known for its sun-drenched beaches and idyllic climate. But at the windswept tip of the Point Loma Peninsula, within the Cabrillo National Monument, stands a lighthouse that holds a colder, more somber history. The Old Point Loma Lighthouse, a charming Cape Cod-style structure, was first lit in 1855. It sits high on a bluff, over 400 feet above the sea, a position that ultimately proved to be its downfall. While the high vantage point seemed ideal, the lighthouse was often shrouded in low-lying fog and clouds, rendering its light completely invisible to ships below. After only 36 years of frustratingly unreliable service, it was extinguished in 1891, replaced by a new lighthouse at the bottom of the cliff. But though its light was put out, the spirit of its most dedicated keeper is said to have remained, still walking the halls, forever bound to the home he loved. The primary ghost of Old Point Loma is widely believed to be that of Captain Robert Decatur Israel, the lighthouse's final and longest-serving keeper. Captain Israel was a fascinating character, a Spanish-American war veteran who was reportedly wounded in the Battle of Chapultepec. He was a tall, imposing man, known for his meticulous dedication to his duties and his deep love for the lighthouse. For 21 years, he and his family lived in the isolated home, tending the light, polishing the brass, and living a life dictated by the rhythm of the sea and the demands of the lamp. Life was not easy. There was no source of fresh water on the peninsula, and it had to be hauled in by wagon over rough terrain. The isolation was profound, yet, by all accounts, Captain Israel considered it his sanctuary. When the lighthouse was decommissioned in 1891, he was heartbroken. He reluctantly handed over the keys and moved to a home in the city, but a part of him never left. Today, the Old Point Loma Lighthouse is a beautifully restored museum, allowing visitors to step back in time and see what life was like for a 19th century lighthouse keeper. But many visitors and National Park Service rangers get more than just a history lesson. They get a chilling encounter with Captain Israel himself. The paranormal activity here is not loud or violent. It is subtle, persistent, and deeply personal, as if the ghost is simply going about his daily routine, annoyed by the constant stream of tourists interrupting his peace. One of the most common reports from both rangers and visitors is the sound of heavy, labored footsteps. They are often heard on the second floor, pacing back and forth, or slowly ascending the tight, spiral staircase that leads to the lantern room. The sound is often described as the tread of heavy boots on wooden floors, so clear and distinct that rangers will rush upstairs, convinced a visitor has gotten locked inside after closing, only to find the entire upper floor completely empty, the air still and silent. Sudden, dramatic cold spots are another hallmark of the Point Loma haunting. A visitor might be standing in a warm, sunlit room when they are suddenly enveloped by a pocket of intense, bone-chilling cold. The phenomenon lasts for only a few moments before dissipating, but it is often accompanied by the distinct feeling of being watched, or the prickling sensation of hair standing up on the back of the neck. This often happens near the entrance to the Lantern Room, Captain Israel's former workspace. Disembodied sounds are also frequently reported. Low, mournful moans and heavy sighs seem to emanate from the walls of the master bedroom. Staff have reported hearing what sounds like someone clearing their throat or a deep, guttural cough coming from an empty room. On several occasions, rangers closing up for the night have heard the front door, which they had just locked and bolted, suddenly rattle violently as if someone on the other side were desperate to get in or out. The spirit of Captain Israel seems to become more active after the crowds have gone home for the day. Several rangers have had unsettling experiences while working alone in the lighthouse after dark. One ranger reported that as she was documenting artifacts in the living room, she saw the rocking chair in the corner begin to rock back and forth on its own, slowly and rhythmically, as if an unseen occupant were sitting there watching her. Another ranger, working late in the attached kitchen building, heard a loud crash from the main house. Fearing a break-in, he called for backup. A thorough search of the building revealed nothing out of place, no sign of forced entry, and no explanation for the sound. Perhaps the most compelling evidence of a haunting comes from the experiences of paranormal investigators who have been granted rare after-hours access. One team from the San Diego Paranormal Research Society conducted an investigation and reported extensive phenomena. Their EMF detectors, which measure electromagnetic fields, spiked dramatically near the top of the spiral staircase. They captured several EVPs, including a faint, raspy voice that, when amplified, seems to whisper the name Israel. They also documented the malfunction of multiple fully charged cameras and audio recorders, a common occurrence in locations with high paranormal energy. Some believe that Captain Israel is not alone. The spirit of a woman, possibly his wife Maria, has also been sensed in the building. Her presence is associated with the smell of old-fashioned perfume that will suddenly manifest, and then vanish, and a general feeling of comforting, maternal energy that is a stark contrast to the sometimes grumpy and imposing presence of the captain. The Old Point Loma Lighthouse is a unique case. It is not a place of profound tragedy or violence. It is instead a place of profound dedication. The spirit that lingers here is not a tormented soul, but a devoted keeper, a man so intertwined with his duty and his home that even death could not force him to leave his post. Visitors who walk through its rooms today may feel his presence as a cold spot, or hear his footsteps on the stairs, the ghostly echoes of a man still tending a light that went out over a century ago, a lonely sentinel standing guard in his silent, fog-shrouded tower by the sea. Number 5. Seul Choix Point Lighthouse, Michigan, on the rugged northern shore of Lake Michigan, in the Upper Peninsula, lies a point of land the French explorers named Seul Choix, meaning only choice. It was the only harbor of refuge in this wild and dangerous stretch of coastline. Here, a brilliant white conical lighthouse was erected in 1895 to guide ships through the treacherous waters. The Seul Choix Point Lighthouse is a classic Great Lakes light, a testament to the hardy souls who manned these remote outposts, but it is also home to a particularly stubborn and charismatic ghost. A former keeper who loved his lighthouse so much, he simply refused to leave, even after his death. The ghost of Seul Choix Point is believed to be that of Joseph Willie Townsend, a keeper who served at the light in the early 1900s. Townsend was a man known for his dedication, his sense of humor, and his ever-present cigars. He was deeply attached to the lighthouse and the solitary life it offered. In 1910, after a long life of service, Keeper Townsend passed away in the lighthouse, reportedly in the upstairs bedroom of the keeper's dwelling. Due to the harsh winter weather and the remoteness of the location, his body could not be immediately transported for a proper burial. His family, honoring his deep connection to the lighthouse, had his body embalmed in the basement of the very home where he had lived and worked for so many years. It is this final, intimate act, his death and his embalming within the walls of the lighthouse, that is believed to have permanently tethered his spirit to the property. Joseph Townsend is not a shy ghost. His presence has been reported for decades by subsequent keepers, Coast Guard personnel, museum volunteers, and countless visitors. His activity is so frequent and so characteristic that the staff of the Gulliver Historical Society, which now maintains the site, speaks of him as if he were just another quirky volunteer. His primary haunting ground is the keeper's house, and his favorite activity seems to be rearranging the place to his liking. Volunteers will lock up the museum for the night, ensuring every chair is pushed in and every exhibit is perfectly arranged. They will return in the morning to find chairs pulled out from the dining room table, as if he had been hosting a spectral card game. Silverware will be found inexplicably moved from one drawer to another. Tools in the workshop will be scattered about, as if he had been working on a phantom project. His presence is most strongly felt in the bedroom where he died. The bed covers are often found rumpled, and a distinct indentation, as if someone has been sitting on the edge of the bed, will appear in the mattress. One of his most famous and unsettling signatures is the lingering smell of his cigar smoke. Joseph Townsend was rarely seen without a cigar, and that habit has apparently followed him into the afterlife. The strong, pungent aroma of a freshly smoked cigar will suddenly fill the air, most often on the second floor of the house, and along the spiral staircase to the lantern room. The scent is powerful and unmistakable, yet it has no discernible source and will vanish as quickly as it appeared. Given the strict no-smoking rules on the historic property, the smell is deeply unnerving and widely considered to be definitive proof of Townsend's presence. His apparition has also been seen on numerous occasions. He is described as a tall man with a beard, often seen peering out of the second-story windows of the keeper's house, as if surveying his domain. One particularly credible sighting came from a woman who was visiting the lighthouse with her family. While her husband and children went up the tower, she stayed behind on the grounds. Looking up at the house, she saw a man with a stern face and a beard, dressed in keeper's attire, staring down at her from an upstairs window. Annoyed that a reenactor was ruining the historic authenticity for her, she went to complain to the staff. When she described the man she saw, the volunteers turned pale and showed her a photograph of Joseph Willie Townsend. It was the exact man she had seen in the window. But it is the sounds that are often the most direct evidence of his presence. Volunteers working alone in the building have heard loud, clear footsteps walking across the floor above them. They have heard the distinct sound of someone climbing the 96 iron steps of the tower, only to find it completely empty. On one occasion, a group of investigators from a paranormal television show was recording in the lantern room at the top of the tower. They were asking questions, hoping to elicit a response. Suddenly, a clear, disembodied male voice was recorded, saying, "Look out!" The investigators were stunned, as no one else was in the tower at the time. The spirit of Joseph Townsend appears to be not just a residual echo, but an intelligent and interactive entity. He seems to enjoy playing pranks on the living. Volunteers have reported feeling a tap on their shoulder, only to turn around to an empty room. Others have had the uncanny feeling of someone looking over their shoulder as they read the historical displays. He seems particularly interested in the museum's restoration efforts. During a period when volunteers were painstakingly restoring the kitchen to its 1910 appearance, they would frequently find their tools had been moved overnight, always to a place that made their next task more convenient, as if the old keeper was helpfully lending a ghostly hand. The haunting of Seul Point is a beloved part of local lore. Unlike many haunted locations steeped in tragedy and fear, the ghost of Keeper Townsend is seen as a protective, if sometimes mischievous presence. He is a man who so loved his job and his home that he decided his retirement would be a permanent one. Visitors come from all over, not just to see a historic lighthouse, but in the hopes of catching a whiff of phantom cigar smoke or seeing the spectral face of the keeper who still dutifully watches over Michigan's only Choix harbor. Number 6. Boon Island Light, Maine. Off the coast of York, Maine, lies a barren, desolate collection of granite rocks that barely rise above the waves. This is Boon Island. For sailors, it is a nightmare, a jagged, nearly invisible hazard, responsible for countless shipwrecks. It is also home to the tallest lighthouse in New England, Boon Island Light, a stark 133-foot stone tower that stands as a lonely monument against the unforgiving Atlantic. There is no soil here, no trees, nothing but wave-battered rock and the tower. The story of this place is not one of gentle, mischievous ghosts. It is a raw, brutal tale of survival, starvation, and cannibalism. A history so dark that the island itself feels cursed, haunted by the desperate screams of those the sea claimed, and those who were forced to do the unthinkable to survive. The haunting of Boon Island begins long before the lighthouse was built, with the wreck of the British ship Nottingham Galley in the brutal winter of 1710. The ship, captained by John Dean, ran aground on the rocks during a violent snowstorm. The 14 men aboard managed to scramble onto the frozen islet, saving almost nothing from the wreck. They were stranded on a barren rock in the dead of winter with no food, no fire, and no shelter from the relentless, freezing gales. What followed was a descent into a real-life nightmare. The ship's carpenter died of exposure within days. The crew, starving and delirious, resorted to eating seaweed and mussels scraped from the rocks. As more men succumbed to starvation and the brutal cold, the survivors were faced with a horrific choice. Driven by the primal instinct to survive, they made the decision to cannibalize their dead crewmates. For nearly a month, the survivors lived in this frozen hell, huddled together for warmth, their minds tormented by their actions. Finally, they were spotted by a vessel from shore and rescued. But the horror of what happened on Boon Island became a permanent stain on its history. The first lighthouse was built on this cursed rock in 1811 to prevent such tragedies from happening again. But life for the keepers of Boon Island was arguably the most difficult and isolating assignment in the entire U.S. lighthouse service. They were utterly alone, surrounded by the violent sea, their only link to the outside world a boat that could only land in the calmest of weather. Storms would wash completely over the island, forcing the keepers and their families to take refuge in the upper levels of the tower for days on end, listening to the thunderous crash of waves against the stone just feet below them. This profound isolation and the island's dark history created a perfect crucible for paranormal activity. One of the most enduring legends is that of a keeper's young wife. The story goes that during a long and terrible winter, the keeper fell gravely ill and died. His wife, stranded on the island with his body and unable to signal for help due to the relentless storms, went completely insane from grief and solitude. When rescuers were finally able to land on the island weeks later, they found her rocking back and forth in a chair, cradling the frozen corpse of her husband, talking and singing to him as if he were still alive. It is her spirit, they say, that now haunts the lonely tower. Keepers who served at Boon Island after it was automated, as well as local fishermen and boaters, have reported seeing the spectral figure of a woman in white. She is seen on the treacherous rocks, walking near the water's edge, or staring out from the lantern room of the empty lighthouse. Her apparition is often seen just before a storm hits, a ghostly warning to sailors to seek shelter. Her mournful cries are said to be carried on the wind, a sound that chills the blood of anyone who hears it. But she is not the only spirit. The echoes of the Nottingham galley disaster seem to run deep. Fishermen passing the island at night have reported hearing faint cries for help coming from the rocks, only to find no one there. Others have seen strange, flickering lights on the barren island, like the ghosts of phantom campfires. The feeling of overwhelming despair is said to be palpable. Visitors who have been granted permission to land on the island, a rare and difficult feat, describe an immediate and oppressive sense of sorrow and dread, as if the agony of the starving crew never left. One of the most terrifying accounts comes from the era when the lighthouse was still manned. A keeper, making his way from the dwelling to the tower during a storm, was suddenly knocked off his feet by a massive wave that swept across the island. As he was being dragged towards the sea, he felt a strong, cold hand grab his collar and pull him back towards the base of the tower with immense force, saving his life. He looked around, but he was completely alone. He was convinced it was the ghost of a previous keeper, still performing his duty to protect those at the light. The automation of the lighthouse in 1980 only seemed to increase its paranormal reputation. With no living residents, the island was left entirely to its ghosts. The U.S. Coast Guard crews who would visit for maintenance often returned with unsettling stories. They would find tools moved, doors that were locked tight found wide open, and would constantly feel as though they were being watched by unseen eyes from the top of the tower. Some refused to stay overnight, opting to anchor their boat offshore rather than sleep in the dwelling, which they claimed was unbearably cold and filled with a sense of active malice. Boon Island Light is not a place of gentle hauntings. It is a raw, primal location, a place of immense natural power and deep human suffering. The ghosts here are not mischievous. They are the echoes of madness, starvation, and a desperation so profound it has become a permanent feature of the landscape. It stands as a stark reminder that some lights are not beacons of hope, but eternal witnesses to horror. Number 7. New London Ledge Lighthouse, Connecticut. At the mouth of the Thames River in Connecticut, standing not on land but on a square concrete pier in the middle of the water, is a lighthouse that looks more like a grand country home than a traditional tower. The New London Ledge Lighthouse, a 3-story, 11-room French Second Empire mansion, is one of the most architecturally unique and visually striking lighthouses in America. But its stately appearance hides a strange and remarkably well-documented haunting centered around a lonely, lovesick ghost affectionately known as Ernie. The lighthouse was completed in 1909, and its first keepers were from the U.S. Lighthouse Service. Life was remote, confined to the concrete pier and the building itself. In 1939, the U.S. Coast Guard took over operations, and young Coast Guardsmen were stationed at the light for months at a time. It is from this era that the legend of Ernie is born. The story, as it has been passed down, tells of a keeper in the 1920s or 30s. He was a handsome man, but deeply distraught. His beautiful wife, unable to bear the profound isolation of living in a house surrounded by water, ran off with the captain of the Block Island ferry. Heartbroken and abandoned, the keeper could not bear his grief. He climbed the iron stairs to the lantern room one last time, looked out over the water towards the route his wife had taken to escape him, and jumped to his death on the rocks below. Another version of the tale claims he slashed his own throat with a fishing knife. Whatever the method, his tormented spirit is said to have returned to his former home, forever trapped in his grief and solitude. For decades, the story of Ernie, a name given to the ghost by Coast Guardsmen in the 1970s, was little more than a spooky story told to pass the time during long, lonely shifts. But the sheer consistency and frequency of unexplained events eventually forced the Coast Guard to take the haunting seriously. Ernie is not a subtle ghost. He is an active and often disruptive poltergeist. His activity is legendary among those who served at the light. Doors would open and close on their own, often slamming shut with great force. Televisions and radios would turn on by themselves, often at full volume in the middle of the night. The sound of a foghorn would sometimes be heard, even though the real horn was silent. One of the most common pranks attributed to Ernie involves the station's boats. A Coast Guardsman would meticulously tie up a vessel to the pier, only to turn around and find the ropes had been mysteriously untied, and the boat was drifting away. This happened so frequently that it became standard procedure to double-check Ernie's work. The feelings of his presence were undeniable. Men would report feeling an icy chill sweep through a room, or the distinct sensation of someone standing right behind them. At night, they would hear footsteps walking the halls of the upper floors and heavy phantom knocks on their bedroom doors. The sounds of someone weeping have been reported coming from the empty lantern room. The activity became so pronounced that it was officially documented in the lighthouse's logbook, a rare and remarkable acknowledgement of the paranormal by a branch of the U.S. military. Reports from commanding officers detailed unexplained phenomena, from flickering lights to moving furniture. One famous incident involved a Coast Guardsman who was painting a room. He left his paintbrush resting neatly on the rim of the paint can to take a break. When he returned, the brush was gone. He searched the entire lighthouse for it, but it had vanished. Days later, it reappeared, inexplicably embedded, bristles first, in the ceiling of the room he had been painting. When the lighthouse was fully automated in 1987, and the last crew of Coast Guardsmen left, they performed a small symbolic ceremony. As their boat pulled away from the pier for the final time, the last officer in charge shouted back at the empty mansion, "Ernie, you're in charge now. Take care of the place." It seems Ernie took the command to heart. Paranormal investigators, including the team from sci-fi's Ghost Hunters, have conducted numerous investigations at New London Ledge and have all come away convinced of its authenticity. During their investigation, the Ghost Hunters team captured footage of a door opening on its own and recorded a clear EVP of a voice whispering what sounds like "leave" when they were in the keeper's old bedroom. They also experienced unexplained equipment malfunctions and corroborated many of the classic stories told by the Coast Guard crews. Today, the New London Ledge Lighthouse is managed by a preservation society which runs tours of the haunted building. Visitors regularly report experiencing the same phenomena that terrified the young servicemen. They feel cold spots, hear phantom footsteps, and have the overwhelming feeling of being watched, especially near the top of the tower. Some have even claimed to see a shadowy figure out of the corner of their eye, a fleeting glimpse of the heartbroken keeper still making his lonely rounds. The tale of Ernie is a tragic one, a story of love, betrayal, and despair. His ghostly pranks may seem playful at times, but they are born from a deep and abiding sorrow. He remains a permanent resident of his beautiful, isolated home, a lonely man in a phantom mansion, forever pulling the blankets off sleeping visitors, untying boats, and knocking on doors, perhaps just to remind the world of the keeper that time and the woman he loved left behind. Each of these lighthouses, from the sun-bleached shores of Florida to the fog-shrouded rocks of Maine, stands as more than just a navigational aid. They are vertical tombstones, monuments to duty and death, saturated with the emotional residue of the lives lived and lost within their narrow confines. They remind us that for some, the watch never truly ends. The lights may be automated now, the keepers' houses turned into museums, but the old guardians remain. And if you listen closely on a foggy night, over the sound of the waves and the wind, you might just hear their footsteps on the stairs, still climbing, still watching, forever bound to their lonely outposts on the edge of the world.
Thank you.